I heard her voice cut through the kitchen wall like a blade. The old deed folder lay open on the counter, its embossed seal catching the dull morning light. "He's just waiting to die so we can sell the house," she whispered. My hands froze, breath shallow. Did my own family already bury me while I was still alive? Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments, where you're watching from right now. The morning sun fell through the blinds in thin, sharp lines, striping the kitchen table like bars on a cell. My coffee mug trembled slightly as I set it down, the faint rattle against the saucer louder than I intended. I tried to tell myself it was just another ordinary breakfast. But even ordinary things can turn sour when respect is missing. Amanda was already at the stove, stirring eggs with the kind of force that made the pan screech against the burner. My daughter Emily sat across from me, scrolling on her phone, her shoulders hunched in practiced indifference. Derek, my son, leaned against the counter, sipping orange juice straight from the carton like a teenager, though he was a grown man with a wife and responsibilities. "Morning," I said, my voice even, steady. No one looked up. Amanda finally turned, placed the pan down with a clatter, and said, "Eggs are ready. Take it or leave it." The words weren't harsh on the surface, but the tone, the sharp dismissal tucked beneath the casualness, cut deeper than she knew. Or maybe she knew exactly how sharp it was meant to be. I glanced at Emily, hoping for some flicker of warmth. Instead, she sighed dramatically and said, "She's right, Dad. Don't overreact. It's just breakfast. Just breakfast." But breakfast had always been more than food in this house. For years, it had been the one place where laughter, stories, and the smell of my late wife's pancakes carried us through hard mornings. Now, silence stretched between bites, and every scrape of fork against plate sounded like accusation. I reached for the old deed folder, still sitting on the counter from the night before. Its edges were worn smooth from decades of handling, the embossed seal faded but strong. I ran my finger across it, remembering how my wife once pressed her hand on top of mine when we first signed it. That folder wasn't just paper, it was proof of every hour I'd worked, every nail I'd hammered, every sacrifice I'd made. Amanda's eyes flicked toward the folder and then away, quick but noticeable. She smirked, just slightly, and muttered, "Funny how he clings to that thing like it's a baby blanket." The room felt colder. Derek chuckled under his breath. Emily didn't laugh, but she didn't stop them either. Her silence was its own betrayal. I wanted to slam my fist on the table, demand respect, remind them that this house, this life, had been built on my back. But instead, I sipped my coffee. It tasted bitter, metallic, like it had been sitting too long in the pot. "Dad," Emily finally said, lowering her phone but not meeting my eyes, "maybe you should let Amanda handle more of the finances. You've been stressed. It'd be easier." Easier? For whom? I forced a smile, though my jaw tightened. "I'm fine. I've managed just fine." Amanda leaned in, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "We're only trying to help. You shouldn't worry about things you can't keep up with anymore." That line, "can't keep up with anymore," landed heavier than all the rest. It wasn't just breakfast anymore. It was a reminder that in their eyes, I was already slipping, already irrelevant. The air in the kitchen grew thick. The ceiling fan creaked as it spun overhead, stirring the smell of overcooked eggs. Outside, a lawnmower buzzed faintly, distant and indifferent. Inside, the silence pressed against my chest until I had to push my chair back just to breathe. "Excuse me," I muttered, standing. My knees cracked, betraying my age in a way I wished they wouldn't. As I left the table, I caught a whisper. Amanda's voice, low but clear enough through the quiet. "He won't last long here." Emily's response was muffled, but the tone wasn't defense. It was agreement. I paused in the hallway, hand resting on the deed folder as though it could steady me. My pulse throbbed in my ears, the folder's weight strangely grounding. For a moment, I considered turning back, demanding an explanation. But something inside me told me not to, not yet. Instead, I went to the front door, opened it wide, and let the cool air wash over me. Across the street, Mrs. Klein was trimming her roses. She lifted her head, gave me a small wave, then looked past me into the house. Her expression shifted, curiosity sharpening into something else, something closer to pity. She looked away quickly, but the damage was done. I closed the door, slow and careful. The lock clicked into place, echoing louder than it should have. Inside, the voices had lowered again, but I could still catch Amanda's tone, clipped and confident. The kind of voice someone uses when they already think they've won. And in that moment, as I stood in my own hallway with the folder pressed against my chest, one truth settled cold in my bones: they didn't see me as a man anymore. They saw me as an obstacle. The coffee mug still sat on the table, a thin crack running down its side. I hadn't noticed it before. Maybe it had always been there, maybe it was new. But as the sunlight caught the fracture, I realized something chilling: things don't break all at once. They break in silence, in hairline cracks, until one day, they shatter. And as I stared at that cup, I couldn't shake the feeling that the next crack wouldn't come from porcelain. And as I stared at that cup, I couldn't shake the feeling that the next crack wouldn't come from porcelain. The following Sunday, the church bells rang across the neighborhood, their sound crisp and clean against the autumn air. I buttoned my jacket carefully, sliding the deed folder into the inside pocket where it always seemed to belong now. My late wife had insisted we go to church every week. She said the building wasn't just about faith, it was about community. I understood her better now than ever. Inside, the congregation was already buzzing. The pews filled with familiar faces, neighbors, shopkeepers, old friends. Their eyes followed me as I walked down the aisle, their nods polite but questioning. I felt it in their stares: they'd heard something. Small towns always hear something. During coffee hour after the service, I stood by the table of pastries, holding a paper cup of weak coffee. That's when Mr. Lawson, a neighbor from 2 streets over, leaned in close. His voice was casual, but his words heavy. "Heard there are changes coming in your house, William." The way he said it, slow, deliberate, told me he wasn't asking. He was confirming gossip. Before I could answer, Amanda appeared, slipping her arm through Derek's. Her smile was all performance, wide and gleaming, but her eyes locked on me like knives. Emily followed close behind, her expression tense, jaw tight. Amanda spoke loudly enough for those nearby to hear: "Yes, we're just trying to make sure Dad's comfortable. Sometimes he resists what's best for him." A few heads turned our way. I felt heat rise in my chest. "What's best for me?" I asked quietly. Amanda didn't flinch. "Yes. From now on, we're setting house rules. You need to follow them if you want to stay." Derek nodded, his silence more painful than words. Emily crossed her arms, and when I searched her face for some kind of protest, all I found was cold resolve. "Dad," she said, voice low but steady, "it's easier this way. Please, don't fight it." It was no longer Amanda versus me. My own blood had joined her side. I felt the weight of the deed folder pressing against my chest, like it was reminding me that this house, this life, hadn't been handed to me. I had built it, paid for it, protected it. Yet here I was, being told to obey or leave. I set my cup down on the table, the liquid trembling, threatening to spill. "Obey?" I repeated. Amanda tilted her head, her tone dripping with mock sympathy. "Yes. Obey. It's time to accept your limits." That word, limits, hung in the air like a verdict. I should have shouted. I should have torn the mask off in front of everyone, told them how she'd spoken in my own kitchen, whispering that I was just waiting to die. But instead, I stood still, letting the silence stretch. Because silence, in that moment, carried more weight than rage. The chatter around us dimmed. A few people pretended to busy themselves with pastries, but their ears were tuned sharply to us. In small towns, public arguments become tomorrow's scripture. Emily looked down at the floor, then back at me. Her voice cracked, just slightly, but her words struck clean. "Dad, you either follow our rules, or you leave." It was the first time my daughter had chosen Amanda's voice over mine. And she chose to do it in public. Something inside me snapped, but not loudly, quietly, like glass cracking beneath heavy cloth. I leaned closer, my voice barely above a whisper. "You'd put me out of the house your mother and I built?" Emily's lips trembled, but she didn't take the words back. She only shook her head once. Amanda smiled triumphantly, as if the verdict had been delivered. She tugged Derek's arm and turned away, satisfied. I stood there, still, while the whispers grew. "Did you hear that?" someone muttered behind me. "Poor man, his own kids," another voice whispered. The sting wasn't just in the words, it was in the pity. The pity cut deeper than the disrespect. I tightened my grip on the folder hidden in my jacket. The leather corners dug into my palm like a reminder, proof of ownership, proof of sacrifice, proof of everything they were trying to erase. I left the church quietly, walking down the steps into the bright sunlight. The air smelled of fallen leaves, sharp and earthy, but it did little to clear the heaviness pressing against my chest. As I reached the sidewalk, I caught Mrs. Klein whispering to another neighbor, her eyes darting toward me. They both fell silent as I passed. The community knew something was breaking inside my walls. And now, I couldn't ignore it either. I walked home slowly, each step heavy. My shoes crunched against the gravel, but all I could hear was Emily's voice replaying in my head, "You either follow our rules, or you leave." At the front door, I hesitated, hand resting on the knob. Through the wood, faint voices carried, Amanda's sharp, Derek's low, Emily's caught between. My family was deciding my future without me, as if I was already gone. And in that moment, one thought rose clear as glass: something was about to break. And in that moment, one thought rose clear as glass: something was about to break. The first envelope arrived on Monday morning, slipped through the brass mail slot with a soft clatter. At first glance, it looked ordinary, just another bank statement, the kind I had opened 1,000 times before. But when I slid my finger under the seal and pulled out the papers, something about the numbers on the page made my throat tighten. The balance wasn't right. For decades, I'd kept meticulous records. Every paycheck, every bill, every mortgage installment, written in my old leather ledger, tucked safely into the drawer beneath the deed folder. Yet here, in black and white, were withdrawals I hadn't made. Transfers I hadn't approved. The kitchen was quiet except for the clock ticking above the stove. I sat at the table, statement spread before me, coffee cooling untouched. My hands shook, not from weakness, but from fury I struggled to contain. Derek strolled in, shirt half-buttoned, tie hanging loose. He didn't notice the paper at first. He grabbed an apple from the bowl, bit into it loudly, and only then caught sight of my stare. "What's up, Dad?" he asked, mouth full. I held up the statement. "Explain this." He blinked, chewed, swallowed. "Oh, that. Yeah, Amanda and I linked some of the accounts. Makes things easier." "Easier?" My voice was steady, but ice threaded through it. Amanda entered then, carrying a stack of folded laundry. She set it on the counter, dusting her hands like a job finished. "Yes, easier. You don't need to worry about all these little details anymore. We've got it covered." Emily followed, her arms crossed. She didn't speak, but she stood behind Amanda like a shadow, her silence saying more than words. "You had no right," I said. My hand pressed flat against the table, against the folder lying there, its presence grounding me. The embossed seal under my fingertips reminded me of my wife's words the day we signed it, this house will always be ours. Amanda tilted her head, her smile too sharp. William, we're family. We don't need your permission for every little thing. You should be grateful we're managing it. At your age, these numbers can get overwhelming. Her voice was sweet enough for poisoned honey. Emily sighed, brushing hair from her face. She's just trying to help, Dad. Don't make it a fight. But it was already a fight. I pushed the paper across the table, tapping the column of unauthorized transfers. These aren't your funds. They're mine. I worked for every dollar. Derek leaned in, placing his palm flat on the statement. And where would you be without us now? You need us, Dad. You're not alone anymore. Isn't that what you wanted? The twist of his words made my chest ache. Needing someone and being controlled by them were not the same thing. Amanda's eyes flicked to the deed folder on the table. She reached out, not gently, and picked it up, tucking it under her arm as though it belonged there. See? Even this, paperwork, signatures, it's all better handled by us. My jaw tightened, and the room seemed to tilt. That folder was my life, my sweat, my nights of overtime, my wife's laughter echoing through newly painted walls. And here Amanda held it like a purse, like a casual accessory she could carry out the door. You don't touch that, I said, my voice low, dangerous. She raised an eyebrow. Why? Afraid you'll lose it? Everything ends up ours eventually. Emily flinched at her tone, but she didn't stop her. I stood, the chair legs screeching against the floor. Put it down. Amanda hesitated, then smiled, slow, deliberate. She set the folder back on the table, patting it as though soothing a child. Relax. No one's taking anything from you. Yet. The word lingered. Yet. Silence spread like smoke. Derek finished his apple, tossed the core into the sink without rinsing. Emily rubbed her arm, avoiding my eyes. Amanda hummed a little tune as if nothing had happened. But I could feel it. This wasn't care, wasn't help. It was strategy. A slow tightening of the noose. I picked up the folder, cradling it against my chest as I walked out of the kitchen. The hallway light flickered once overhead, buzzing faintly. Every creak of the floorboards beneath my steps reminded me, this was my house. Mine. Yet I could feel it slipping. Upstairs, in the quiet of my room, I sat on the bed and opened the folder. The deed was still there, my name bold across the top. My wife's neat signature beside mine. Proof. Evidence. A lifeline. But even lifelines fray when the people closest to you start cutting at the edges. I traced her name with my finger, whispering under my breath, Martha, what would you do? The paper didn't answer, but the silence did. From below, laughter drifted up, the sound of Amanda and Derek sharing some private joke, Emily's voice joining softly. Once, that sound would have been my joy. Now it was proof of a different kind, that they were united, and I was the outsider. I closed the folder, the snap of its worn clasp loud in the empty room. My pulse drummed against my temples. For the first time in my life, I wasn't sure if the house would outlast me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't sure if the house would outlast me. Dinner that night was quiet at first, but quiet the way a storm is quiet before the thunder splits the sky. The table was set, plates steaming with food Amanda had cooked, though it tasted as bitter as her presence. Derek shoveled forkfuls into his mouth without speaking. Emily stared at her plate, her fork clinking against porcelain with nervous rhythm. I sat at the far end, the old deed folder beside me, closed but heavy, like a witness waiting to testify. Amanda broke the silence. We need to talk. Her voice was steady, rehearsed. Derek looked up, chewing slower, but he didn't speak. He let her lead, as he always did. Amanda's eyes locked on me. This can't go on. You can't keep undermining us. Either you follow the rules of this house, or you get out. There it was. The ultimatum, stripped of pretense. I gripped my fork tighter, the metal bending slightly under my hand. Rules? I asked, keeping my voice calm. Yes. She leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. No meddling with finances. No decisions without us. No more acting like this house is still yours to run. My pulse thudded in my ears. This house, my house, reduced to a set of conditions dictated by the woman who had married into it, not built it. I looked at Derek. And you? He shifted, cleared his throat. She's right, Dad. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Emily's hand twitched on her lap. She didn't look at me. That silence cut deeper than Amanda's words. Amanda smiled thinly, pressing her advantage. We're offering you a choice. Stay, if you can follow our rules. Or pack up and leave. It's really that simple. Simple. The word made me want to laugh. Nothing about this was simple. It was betrayal wrapped in polite tones, theft dressed as family care. I looked down at the folder beside me. My wife's signature glimmered faintly in the overhead light. My jaw clenched so tightly I thought my teeth would crack. I could feel the weight of everyone watching me, waiting for me to explode, to shout, to fight for scraps of dignity. That was what they expected. Anger. Rage. Begging. Instead, I set my fork down carefully, the sound sharp in the silence. All right, I said. Amanda blinked, confused. All right? I nodded slowly. If those are the choices, I'll choose. I pushed back my chair. The legs screeched across the floor, echoing in the dining room like a warning siren. I stood tall, taller than I had in years, and walked calmly to the hall closet. I pulled down my old suitcase, dust motes swirling in the light. The zipper rasped open, loud and final. Behind me, I heard Emily gasp softly. Derek muttered, "Dad, wait," but his voice lacked conviction. Amanda's chair scraped as she stood, her footsteps sharp against the wood. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded. I turned, suitcase open in one hand, the other resting on the deed folder pressed to my chest. Packing. Her face faltered. This wasn't the script she had prepared. "You can't be serious," she snapped. "Oh, I'm serious," I said. My voice was calm, steady, but underneath it carried something colder, harder. "You gave me a choice. I'm taking it." For the first time that evening, Amanda's composure cracked. She glanced at Derek, expecting him to step in, to stop me. But Derek looked away, jaw tight, unwilling to face me directly. Emily's eyes brimmed with something I couldn't name, fear, maybe regret, but still, she said nothing. I walked past them, suitcase dragging slightly, the sound a steady drumbeat in the quiet house. Each step felt like a line being drawn, not in sand, but in stone. Amanda's voice chased me down the hall. "You're running away like a coward." I stopped at the door, turned slightly. "No," I said, holding her gaze with a calm that made her flinch. "I'm walking away with my dignity. There's a difference." I opened the front door. Cool night air rushed in, carrying the scent of cut grass and distant rain. The porch light flickered, throwing long shadows across the lawn. Behind me, the silence was suffocating. They thought they had broken me. They thought I'd bend, beg, cling to the scraps they offered. But as I stepped into the night, the suitcase heavy in one hand, the folder secure in the other, I felt something else entirely, freedom. For the first time in years, I wasn't trapped by their expectations. I wasn't a pawn in their game. I was a man making a choice. They wanted me gone. So I left. They thought I'd bend, beg, cling to the scraps they offered. But as I stepped into the night, suitcase in one hand and the folder in the other, I felt something else entirely: freedom. The sound of the zipper still rang in my ears, a jagged rasp that felt louder than thunder. My old suitcase sat open on the bed, half filled with shirts and socks, bottles of medicine rattling in a side pocket. Each item I folded carried weight: 30 years of mornings, of dinners, of laughter and tears lived within these walls. Now I was leaving them behind, not because I wanted to, but because my own blood had told me to. I added one last thing before closing it: the deed folder. I slid it between clothes like armor, the embossed seal pressing faintly against the fabric. When the zipper finally closed, the sound felt final, like the end of a chapter written against my will. From downstairs, muffled voices rose: Amanda's sharp, Derek's quieter, Emily caught between. Their words blended into a low hum of plotting, a language of control spoken as though I were already gone. I paused at the top of the stairs, hand tightening on the suitcase handle. The hallway smelled faintly of polish and dust, of a home kept tidy but stripped of warmth. I glanced at the photographs on the wall, my wife's smile frozen in frames, our children's younger faces grinning back at me. All of it looked like a life that belonged to someone else now. Step by step, I descended. Each creak of the stairs felt like a drumbeat announcing my exit. When I reached the living room, the three of them were waiting. Amanda's arms folded, Derek's hands shoved deep into his pockets, Emily biting her lip. "Where are you going?" Amanda asked, her voice deceptively calm. I lifted the suitcase slightly. "You gave me a choice. I'm choosing." Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't stop me. She didn't expect this. She expected a man who would cling, not one who would walk. I crossed the living room slowly, every sound magnified: the roll of the suitcase wheels, the shift of my shoes against wood, the low buzz of the ceiling light overhead. At the front door, I paused only once. Emily's voice wavered behind me. "Dad, you don't have to." But she stopped herself. The silence after her words was worse than the ultimatum. I opened the door. Cool night air spilled in, carrying the faint scent of rain-soaked earth. My chest ached, but my hand was steady as I pulled the suitcase across the threshold. The porch boards groaned under my weight. Across the street, Mrs. Klein paused mid-snip, hedge clippers hanging in the air. Mr. Hughes, from 2 doors down, leaned against his mailbox, pretending to check letters he wasn't holding. Their eyes locked on me, and then on the suitcase trailing behind. A whisper cut across the dark like a knife: "Guess they finally kicked him out." It wasn't shouted, but it might as well have been. My throat tightened, heat burning behind my eyes, but I didn't falter. I pulled the suitcase down the steps, each thud of the wheels echoing like a gavel strike. The neighbors' stares followed me, pity mixed with judgment. Once, they had looked at me with respect; now, I was just an old man pushed from his own home. At the curb, a taxi idled, engine humming. I loaded the suitcase into the trunk, slid into the back seat, and gave the driver the address of a cheap motel on the edge of town. As the car pulled away, I looked back once. My house stood tall against the night, porch light flickering, shadows moving behind curtains. For the first time, it didn't feel like mine. The motel was quiet, its neon sign buzzing weakly against the darkness. The room smelled faintly of bleach and stale cigarettes. The carpet was worn, the lamp crooked, the bedspread patterned with colors too loud to disguise its age. Yet when I shut the door and set the suitcase down, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: space to breathe. I placed the deed folder on the desk beneath the yellow lamp. The light caught its edges, throwing a sharp shadow across the surface. I sat in the hard chair, staring at it for a long while. The folder wasn't just paper, it was the line between me and oblivion, the last proof that I still mattered. I opened my laptop, the screen's glow washing over my face. The bank's website blinked to life, login fields waiting. My cursor hovered, heart pounding, as I considered what Amanda and Derek hadn't imagined: that I still had control. One click could cancel the mortgage payments. Another could freeze the accounts they leaned on. The power wasn't gone, they had only assumed I'd never use it. Outside, rain began to fall softly, tapping against the window like cautious fingers. I leaned back in the chair, fingers steepled, breath steadying. They thought they had exiled me. They thought the story ended when I walked out. But the truth was sharper. This was only the beginning. They thought the story ended when I walked out. But the truth was sharper. This was only the beginning. By sunrise, I had a phone in one hand and their mortgage in the other. The motel room was dim, blinds half-drawn, dust floating in thin shafts of light. The old deed folder lay open on the desk, papers spread out like a battlefield map. For the first time in weeks, I felt control return, not as a whisper, but as a weight in my palm. I began with the mortgage. Their entire safety net depended on the illusion that I would keep paying. They assumed the old man would keep writing checks until his hands gave out. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, the bank's portal open, the auto-pay option highlighted. Click. The button turned gray, a confirmation box appearing. I pressed submit. The sound of the enter key echoed in my ears like a trigger pull. Somewhere, far away, their world had just shifted. I moved on to the car insurance. Derek had insisted on putting both their vehicles under my account years ago, promising they'd reimburse me. Not once had they done so. I pulled up the policy, scrolled through the details, and with 3 swift clicks, cancelled both. The screen went blank, and my chest felt lighter. Next, the credit cards. Over time, they had added themselves as authorized users, draining small amounts, purchases they thought I wouldn't notice. Gas, groceries, then electronics, then luxury items. The slow bleed of entitlement. I scrolled down, removed each of their names, one by one. Delete. 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 Each removal felt like unchaining myself, iron links falling away. I leaned back in the hard motel chair, staring at the glowing screen. For decades, my account had been their lifeline, a silent river they never thanked but always drank from. For decades, I had told myself it was for family, that sacrifice was the cost of love. But sacrifice without respect is nothing but slavery. I thought of my wife, how she'd fold bills carefully, slip them into envelopes, and whisper, "This is for their future." She'd believe they would honor the effort. What would she say now, if she saw Amanda smirking as she tucked the deed folder under her arm, claiming my work as her prize? My throat tightened. I placed my hand over her faded signature inside the folder. "This is for you, Martha," I whispered. By mid-morning, the desk looked like a command center. Bank statements, insurance notices, copies of receipts, all spread out like evidence in a trial waiting to be called. My coffee had gone cold, but I didn't care. Every document I touched became a weapon sharpened by betrayal. Around noon, I called Mr. Harlan, the local banker I'd known for 30 years. His voice was cautious when he picked up. "William? Haven't heard from you in a while." "I need to know something," I said. "Has Derek been to see you recently?" A pause. Then a sigh. "He tried to take a personal loan. 50,000. Using your house as collateral." The words stung, though I'd half expected them. "Without my signature?" "Forged paperwork," Harlan admitted. "We caught it. I was going to call you, but, well, I figured you knew." I closed my eyes. The folder's edge dug into my palm. "Thank you, Harlan. That's all I needed." When I hung up, I stared at the motel's peeling wallpaper. Anger simmered, but beneath it was clarity. This wasn't just disrespect anymore, it was theft in waiting. I opened my ledger, the old leather book I'd kept for decades. Line by line, I wrote what I had done: mortgage cancelled, cars uninsured, credit cards revoked. Each entry neat, precise, like carving history into stone. For the first time in years, my account balance belonged to me. My money was mine again. I sat back, exhaling slowly. The rain outside had stopped, replaced by the distant sound of cars rushing down the highway. Life moved on, indifferent to betrayal or revenge. But inside that room, time felt sharpened, heavy with purpose. By evening, I imagined the ripple effect beginning, bills bouncing, angry phone calls, panic setting in. Amanda pacing, Derek shouting, Emily caught in the middle. They would rage, they would curse, they would accuse. But they wouldn't see me. Not yet. The silence was my weapon. I closed the deed folder, the snap of its clasp echoing in the small room. The war had begun, and I was no longer a victim. They thought I was waiting to die. But by nightfall, they would learn I was very much alive, and their storm was only beginning. They thought I was waiting to die. But by nightfall, they would learn I was very much alive, and their storm was only beginning. Tell me, what would you do in this situation? I'd love to know. By Wednesday morning, my phone lit up with 12 missed calls. By Friday, the number had doubled. Each one came from the same two names, Derek and Amanda. The silence of the motel room made the buzzing sound louder, sharper, as though the phone itself vibrated with their panic. I let it ring. On the 13th call, I finally pressed play on the voicemail. Amanda's voice poured out, high-pitched and furious. Do you realize what you've done? The mortgage bounced. The bank is calling us, and it's humiliating. You can't just walk out and leave everything undone. The next message was Derek, his tone already cracking. Dad, the insurance lapsed. They're saying the cars aren't covered. If something happens, God, you can't just pull this on us. By the 20th message, the anger had shifted to pleading. Amanda again, softer this time. William, please, just call us back. We can fix this. We'll sit down, make a plan. Don't do this to Emily. Emily. The mention of her name made me pause. I sat at the motel's small desk, the deed folder open beside the lamp. Its pages cast long shadows across the wood, like bars cutting the room into pieces. I ran my finger along the embossed seal, steadying myself. Another voicemail came in, Derek this time, voice raw. Dad, please. Amanda's upset, Emily's asking questions. Just, stop. We need you. But needing and respecting are two different things. I deleted each voicemail after listening once. One by one, I cleared them from the phone until the screen was blank. Clean. The motel was silent except for the faint tick of the wall clock. Outside, cars hummed down the highway, their headlights sweeping briefly across the curtains. The world was moving on, but inside this room, it felt like time had narrowed to a single truth: I wasn't their victim anymore. That afternoon, I went to the diner down the road. The smell of bacon grease and old coffee clung to the air, but the quiet murmur of strangers felt comforting. I ordered black coffee and sat by the window, the deed folder tucked under my arm like a quiet companion. A neighbor, Mr. Hughes, spotted me as he walked in. He gave a nod, then hesitated before saying, "Heard things are rough back at your place." I smiled faintly. Rough for some. His eyebrows rose, but he didn't pry. In small towns, questions are as sharp as knives, but silence often says more. Back at the motel, the calls didn't stop. By evening, there were 22 missed calls. I pressed play again. Amanda's voice cracked now, fury melted into fear. They froze the credit cards. I don't understand what you did, but they're saying we're not authorized anymore. We can't buy groceries. We can't buy gas. William, this is cruel. Cruel. The word echoed in the quiet room. For years, I had been the one covering their bills, smoothing over their debts, making sure they never felt the sting of going without. I had carried them like stones in my pocket, heavy but silent. And now, when I stopped, they called me cruel. The phone buzzed again. This time, Emily's voice. "Dad, is it true? About the loan? The banker said Derek tried to use the house. Please tell me it isn't true." Her voice cracked on the last word. She didn't sound like a conspirator anymore. She sounded like a daughter caught between blood and lies. I didn't answer. Not yet. I set the phone down, closed the deed folder, and leaned back in the chair. The motel light flickered once, buzzing faintly. My reflection in the window looked older, sharper, but steadier than I had in years. By Friday night, the desperation reached my doorstep. A knock rattled the motel door, sharp and insistent. I froze. Through the peephole, I saw them, Derek and Amanda, side by side. His face pale, hers twisted with fury. Behind them, Emily lingered, her eyes uncertain, caught in the shadow between them and me. The knock came again, harder this time. Amanda's voice sliced through the wood. "Open the door, William. We know you're in there." The deed folder sat on the desk behind me, its shadow stretching across the room like a warning. My hand hovered over the knob, my pulse steady, not panicked. This wasn't fear anymore. This was the moment the storm broke through the walls. This wasn't fear anymore. This was the moment the storm broke through the walls. A sharp knock rattled the motel door, reverberating through the thin walls like gunfire. I didn't move at first. The sound was heavy enough to fill the room, yet the silence that followed felt even heavier. I leaned forward slowly, peering through the peephole. And there they were. Derek, pale and sweating, fists clenched. Amanda beside him, eyes narrowed into slits of fury, lips twisted into something between a smile and a snarl. Just behind them, Emily lingered in the shadows of the hallway light. Her arms were crossed, but her eyes weren't cold. They were searching. "Open the door, William," Amanda snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut. "We know you're in there." The old deed folder sat on the desk behind me, its shadow stretching long across the carpet. I kept my hand steady on the knob but didn't turn it. Another knock, harder. Derek's voice, low and tense, "Dad, open it. We need to talk." I unlocked the door but only cracked it open, the chain lock still drawn. Their faces glared back at me through the narrow gap. "You're ruining us," Amanda spat. "Over some stupid pride. Do you have any idea what you're doing?" My voice was calm, steady. "I know exactly what I'm doing." Derek leaned closer, his breath hot through the crack. "You're cutting your own blood off." "For what? To prove some point?" I kept my eyes on his, unblinking. "No, son. To remind you who built the point you're standing on." Emily flinched slightly at that, her gaze darting to the floor. Amanda saw it and tightened her grip on Derek's arm. "Let us in," Amanda demanded. I unlatched the chain, stepped back, and opened the door fully. Not to welcome them, but to face them on my terms. They entered like a storm, Amanda pacing immediately, Derek looming large, Emily hanging back by the threshold. The room felt smaller with their presence, the walls pressing in, the smell of their desperation heavy in the air. Amanda turned on me, voice rising. "You cut the mortgage, the insurance, the credit cards, everything. Do you realize how humiliating this is? The bank calls, the neighbors whisper. You've made us a spectacle." Her words weren't entirely wrong. The whispers had already started to spread. But humiliation is only poison if you drink it. I had no intention of swallowing theirs. Derek slammed his fist on the desk, making the folder jump. "This is insane. We can't live like this. You need to fix it." I looked at the folder, then back at him. I fixed it. I fixed what I should have fixed years ago. Amanda's laugh was sharp, bitter. So what now? You starve us out until we crawl back to beg? That your plan? I leaned forward slightly, my voice cold as stone. No. My plan is to survive with dignity. Whether you do the same is up to you. For the first time, Emily spoke, her voice shaking. Dad, is it true? Did he try to take a loan against the house? The room froze. Derek's face went rigid. Amanda's head snapped toward him, eyes wide with sudden suspicion. I reached into the folder, pulled out the printed note I'd requested from Harlan, the banker. I slid it across the desk, the paper rasping against the wood. Funny thing, Derek, I said softly. The bank told me you tried to borrow $50,000. Using my house as collateral. Using a forged signature. Amanda's face drained of color. Emily covered her mouth with her hand. Derek's fists tightened. That's not. Don't lie to me. My voice cut through his words. Don't lie to your sister. Don't lie to your wife. They know the truth now. And so do I. Amanda turned on Derek, fury sparking in her eyes. You told me you had it handled. You said. Shut up, Derek barked, but his voice cracked. Emily stepped forward, trembling. Is it true? She whispered. Derek didn't answer. His silence was louder than any confession. I leaned back, folding my arms. So you see, Amanda, this was never about my pride. It was about his lies. The motel hallway creaked outside. A shadow lingered, a neighbor leaning out of his door, listening. Another head peeked out farther down the hall. The confrontation wasn't private anymore. It was becoming a spectacle, whether Derek liked it or not. Amanda turned to me, her fury curdling into something like fear. You'll destroy us. Over money? No, I said evenly. Over respect. Because without respect, money is just paper. And family is just strangers. Derek's face twisted. You think this is over? His voice dropped, lower, darker. This isn't over, Dad. He stepped closer, towering over me. His fists clenched, his jaw tight. For a moment, I thought he might strike. But he didn't. He turned, grabbed Amanda's arm, and stormed toward the door. Emily lingered a moment longer, her eyes meeting mine. They were wet, filled with something between sorrow and shame. Dad, she whispered. But she didn't finish. She turned and followed them out. The door slammed shut behind them, the echo rattling through the thin walls. I sat back in the chair, staring at the folder lying open, the banker's note still visible. The hallway outside buzzed with low murmurs, neighbors whispering about what they'd just seen. The truth was no longer contained. Derek's last words hung in the room like smoke. Not a threat. A promise. And promises from desperate men are the most dangerous. Not a threat. A promise. And promises from desperate men are the most dangerous. Stay with me, because what happens next will shock you even more. The courthouse smelled of old wood and ink, the kind of place where paper holds more weight than muscle. I walked through its tall doors with the deed folder tucked under my arm, the leather worn but strong. For weeks it had been a shield. Today, it was a weapon. I met Mr. Callahan, an old lawyer I'd known since my contracting days. His office was cramped, filled with case files stacked like walls, but his eyes were sharp, the kind of man who lived in details. You look like a man ready to dig in, he said, shaking my hand firmly. I'm done being buried, I answered. I laid the folder on his desk. He opened it carefully, flipping through each page, the deed, bank statements, the banker's note about Derek's forged loan application. He whistled low, his eyebrows rising higher with every sheet. "William, this isn't just mismanagement. This is fraud. We can file for an eviction order, cancel any authority they think they have, and pursue charges if you want." I nodded slowly. "Do it. Every step. They need to understand this isn't a game." He tapped his pen against the desk, thoughtful. "We'll start with a restraining order. They won't be able to harass you, show up at your motel, or touch your accounts. Next, we'll file eviction papers. Your name's on the deed, not theirs." The sound of those words, "your name's on the deed," settled into me like armor. I left Callahan's office with a stack of papers heavier than my suitcase had felt days earlier. The ink was fresh, but the authority was ancient. Law, in its slow and grinding way, had shifted to my side. That afternoon, I drove back to the motel, documents safe inside the folder. As I walked through the lobby, the clerk gave me a small nod. Word had spread, neighbors talk, gossip travels, but respect lingers when a man takes a stand. Inside my room, I spread the papers out on the desk, arranging them carefully: eviction, restraining order, notarized bank confirmation. Each page gleamed under the lamp, sharp edges casting shadows like blades. I dialed the sheriff's office. A calm voice answered. "Sheriff's Department." "This is William Harris," I said. My voice didn't shake. "I need assistance serving legal papers. Against my own family." There was a pause, the kind that tells you the weight of your words is sinking in. Then, "We'll send an officer to meet you, Mr. Harris. Don't worry, we'll handle it. Don't worry." Funny, how easily people say that. But for the first time in months, I believed it. The following morning, Deputy Miller knocked on my motel door. He was young, polite, his uniform crisp. He reviewed the documents, nodded firmly, and said, "We'll serve them today. You can expect a call once it's done." I thanked him, watching through the window as his cruiser pulled away. For the first time in weeks, the tension in my chest eased, if only slightly. The law was no longer a silent witness, it was stepping onto the field. Later that day, the call came. "Mr. Harris, it's Miller. The papers have been served." They weren't happy, but it's official. "They can't touch your accounts, and they'll have to vacate unless a judge says otherwise." His voice carried a hint of sympathy, maybe even respect. "Thank you, Deputy," I said. I hung up, staring at the folder on the desk. Its weight felt different now. No longer just proof, no longer just memory. It was leverage. That evening, I went for a walk down the street outside the motel. The air was cool, the sky painted orange by sunset. As I passed the diner, I heard the whispers start again. "That's him," one man said quietly. "Kicked his own family out." "Not kicked," another corrected. "Protected. Derek was stealing from him." The balance was shifting. The community wasn't just pitying me anymore. They were starting to see the truth. I stopped by the churchyard, sitting on a bench under the maple tree my wife had loved. The leaves above rattled gently in the wind. I thought of her hand on the folder the day we signed it, her smile as she said, "This will always keep us safe." For years, I had doubted that. For weeks, I'd feared it wasn't enough. But tonight, with legal ink drying and the sheriff's stamp in place, I felt her words again. Back at the motel, I set the folder on the desk, my hand resting on its cover. For decades, I had believed strength was in silence, in shouldering burdens without complaint. But strength isn't silence. Strength is standing, even when it means standing alone. They thought they had forced me out. But now, with the law on my side, they were the ones standing on borrowed ground. And the ground was crumbling beneath them. They thought they had forced me out. But now, with the law on my side, they were the ones standing on borrowed ground. And the ground was crumbling beneath them. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. By the end of the week, Derek's world had begun to unravel like an old sweater tugged at the seam. I heard it first from Mr. Lawson at the diner. He leaned over my booth, voice lowered, though half the room was already listening. "Your boy didn't show up for work today," he said. "Word is, he's been dodging calls. Creditors came by the shop looking for him." I nodded slowly, not surprised. Derek had always hidden behind the image of being dependable, the man who had everything under control. But paper-thin facades can't withstand real storms. Later that day, a notice appeared in the local paper: Amanda's car repossessed. The sleek SUV she paraded through town was gone, replaced by whispers that followed her like shadows. At the grocery store, I saw her myself. She stood in the middle of the aisle, a cart half empty, her face pale and drawn. A clerk asked if she needed help, and her voice cracked when she snapped back, "I'm fine." The lie was obvious. Customers pretended to keep shopping, but their eyes lingered, sharp and curious. Emily was with her. She trailed behind, shoulders slumped, clutching a small basket instead of pushing a cart. She looked more like a daughter than a wife in that moment, small, uncertain, ashamed. Our eyes met across the aisle. Hers filled instantly, brimming with something close to apology, but she turned away before I could read it fully. I didn't approach. Not yet. The time for explanations hadn't come. The weight of betrayal still pressed too hard against my chest. That night, in my motel room, I laid the deed folder open on the desk again. The papers inside had grown thicker, new legal notices, receipts, confirmations. Each one added another layer of truth, another stone in the foundation I was rebuilding. I touched the page with my wife's signature, whispering under my breath, "They're crumbling, Martha. Just like you said they would." The next morning, word spread further. Derek had lost his job. His boss couldn't cover for him anymore, not with creditors knocking, not with fraud whispers circling. In a town like ours, reputation is currency, and Derek's had gone bankrupt overnight. By afternoon, Amanda showed up at the diner. She walked in with her chin high, but her eyes darted nervously. She sat at the counter, ordered coffee she couldn't pay for, and tried to pretend nothing had changed. But the room knew. Mrs. Klein leaned to her friend and whispered, "That's the one who tried to take the house." Amanda's face stiffened. She stirred her coffee furiously, the spoon clinking against the cup like a metronome of panic. When she stood to leave, the waitress cleared her throat. "Ma'am, you'll need to settle your tab." Amanda froze, color rising in her cheeks. Emily, who had come in quietly behind her, fumbled in her purse, pulling out crumpled bills to cover it. The sight of my daughter paying for her mother's shame was a dagger I felt deep. As they left, the diner's chatter picked up. The words weren't kind. Back at the motel, I sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker on. My phone buzzed, a single text from Emily. "Dad. I didn't know about the loan. I swear I didn't. Please believe me." I stared at the message for a long time, my fingers hovering over the keypad. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to trust that my daughter hadn't been part of the scheme. But trust isn't built on words alone, it's built on actions. And hers had been silence when I needed her voice most. I didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, I turned back to the folder, adding the day's newspaper clipping to its growing archive. Each article, each rumor confirmed what I already knew: their facade was collapsing. The masks they had worn for years were cracking, and beneath them was the truth everyone now saw clearly. They thought I was weak, I murmured to the empty room. My voice grew stronger with the words. But weakness doesn't sign eviction papers. Weakness doesn't walk into a courthouse. Weakness doesn't survive betrayal. Outside, a storm rolled in, rain lashing against the window, wind rattling the frame. Inside, I felt steadier than I had in years. Their chaos had become my calm. Their downfall, my vindication. And this was only the middle. The worst for them, and the best for me, was yet to come. Their chaos had become my calm. Their downfall, my vindication. And this was only the middle. The worst for them, and the best for me, was yet to come. Sunday morning, the church bell tolled across town, heavy and solemn. I hadn't planned to go. But something in me stirred, a need to be seen, to stand not as the broken man they had whispered about, but as the man who had survived. I slipped the deed folder under my arm and walked the familiar road, each step a reclaiming. The church was crowded, its wooden pews polished by decades of hands and hymns. Conversations hushed as I entered. Some nodded respectfully. Others looked away, ashamed for the way they had pitied me before. I sat near the front, the folder resting on my lap. Its presence gave me a quiet strength, as though my wife herself sat beside me. When the pastor began, the hymns rose like a tide. Voices filled the air, layered with hope and judgment, prayer and gossip. But the moment the final amen echoed, the whispers began again. "That's him," I heard behind me. "Stood up to his own children." "Not children," another corrected. "Leeches." And he cut them off. The words were sharp, but this time, they weren't about me. They were for them. Amanda and Derek entered late. Their heads were high, but their steps faltered as the murmurs thickened. Emily followed, her face pale, eyes darting nervously. They slid into a pew near the back, but the community's eyes followed like spotlights. Mrs. Klein leaned forward, whispering to her neighbor, "I can't believe they tried to take the house." His house. The pastor's voice broke the tension. "Let us remember," he said carefully, "that respect for family is sacred. Betrayal corrodes the spirit." His eyes, just for a moment, flicked toward the back pew. The congregation shifted, murmurs rippling. Amanda stiffened. Derek clenched his jaw. Emily stared down at her hands, twisting them in her lap. After the service, the courtyard outside buzzed louder than bees. People clustered in groups, some glancing openly at Amanda and Derek. Their polished words, their careful masks, were useless here. Truth had seeped out, and once spilled, it cannot be gathered back. I stood quietly, shaking the pastor's hand, thanking him. His grip lingered, firm. "Truth has its own defense, William," he said softly. Across the courtyard, Amanda tried to spin her story. "It's all a misunderstanding," she said loudly to Mrs. Hughes. "We were only helping him manage his affairs." But Mrs. Hughes frowned. "Helping isn't taking. And everyone knows what Derek did at the bank." Amanda's face flushed. She turned sharply, pulling Derek's arm, heading toward the diner across the street as though she could outrun the whispers. The diner was busy, full of the after-church crowd. The moment Amanda stepped in, the room went quiet. She ordered coffee, her voice too loud, too cheerful. Derek slid into a booth, eyes fixed on the table. Emily trailed behind, her shoulders hunched. I entered a few minutes later, the folder under my arm, and the silence deepened. The air smelled of bacon grease and burnt toast, but it carried something heavier, judgment. Amanda's eyes met mine across the room. Her smile faltered, then vanished. "Dad," Emily whispered, almost inaudible. The waitress came to Amanda's table. "That'll be $2.50 for the coffee." Amanda reached into her purse, rifled through receipts, and came up empty. Her face drained of color. Derek shifted, pulling out his wallet, but it was thin, too thin. The waitress stood patiently, pen poised. Finally, Emily dug into her small purse, pulling out a crumpled bill and coins. She placed them on the table with trembling hands. The room murmured. Not loud, but constant, like a storm moving in. Amanda shoved the money toward the waitress, snapping, "Keep the change." But there was no change. As they stood to leave, a man at the counter muttered, "Guess the house isn't paying their bills anymore." Laughter rippled, low and cutting. Amanda's back stiffened. Derek muttered something under his breath, pulling her quickly toward the door. Emily lingered a moment, her eyes finding mine again. This time, the tears were plain, glistening in the harsh diner light. She mouthed a single word. "Sorry." And then she was gone, following them out into the bright, merciless sunlight. The diner filled again with chatter, but the topic didn't shift. Their downfall was now the town's entertainment. And unlike before, pity no longer lay at my feet. Respect did. I sat at the counter, ordered coffee, and placed the folder gently beside me. The waitress poured my cup, her smile soft, almost reverent. "They can't take what's yours," she said quietly. I nodded, sipping slowly. The bitterness of the coffee matched the moment, but it tasted like victory. Across the street, I saw Amanda and Derek climbing into a borrowed car, their faces pale, their dignity in tatters. The community had judged. And the verdict was clear. The community had judged. And the verdict was clear. The lawyer's office smelled faintly of dust and ink, the kind of smell that clung to old truths finally brought into light. I sat across from Callahan, the deed folder open between us, its pages spread like a battlefield ready for the final strike. "Are you certain?" he asked, his pen poised above a fresh legal document. "As certain as I've ever been," I said. My voice carried no tremor. The decision had been made long before I walked through his door. Callahan nodded, flipping to the forged documents we had uncovered. Derek's signature overlaying mine, Amanda's hand scrawled in the witness line. Sloppy enough to be obvious, arrogant enough to believe no one would ever look. "This is attempted fraud," Callahan said grimly. "You can pursue criminal charges if you choose. But I gather that's not all you want." I placed my hand flat on the folder. "No. I want finality. I want them cut off, with nothing left to claim. And I want the community to know exactly why." His eyes narrowed slightly, then softened with something like respect. "Then let's draft this trust." By the time I left his office, the folder held a new weight. Inside it, alongside the deed and the old signatures, lay fresh papers, legal proof that the house, my legacy, would no longer pass to Derek or Amanda. Instead, it would go to a veterans' charity, one my wife had always spoken of supporting. It was more than revenge. It was a statement: blood without respect is not inheritance. That evening, I spread the documents across my motel desk, the lamplight illuminating each word. I traced my wife's name, then my own, then the new trust. Her voice seemed to echo in the room: "Do good with what we've built." The next day, I invited Callahan to meet me at the town hall. Public records would need updating, and I wanted it done where eyes could see. When I arrived, Derek and Amanda were already there. They must have heard, gossip travels fast. Amanda's face was pale but defiant. Derek's jaw was tight, sweat shining on his forehead. Emily trailed behind, her eyes red from crying. Amanda stormed toward me. "What are you doing here?" I lifted the folder, tapping it gently. "Finishing what you started." Callahan stepped in, his voice calm but firm. "Mr. Harris is transferring ownership of the Harris home into a charitable trust. Effective immediately." Gasps rippled across the small crowd that had gathered in the hallway. Clerks, neighbors, townsfolk, they'd come for licenses, permits, errands. Now they had front-row seats to a family's collapse. Amanda's mouth opened, then closed. She stammered, "You can't, he can't." But Derek interrupted, his voice breaking. "Dad, please. This is our home. My kid's future. You can't just give it away." I stepped closer, my eyes locked on his. "You tried to steal it before I was even gone. You forged my name, Derek. You buried me alive while I was still breathing. Don't talk to me about futures. His face crumpled. Amanda looked away, her mask of control cracking. Emily pressed her hands to her face, tears slipping through her fingers. Callahan handed the clerk the documents. Stamps thudded against paper, each one echoing like a hammer driving nails into a coffin. The clerk looked up, voice firm. It's official. A hush fell over the hallway. The symbolic weight of that word, official, landed like a stone in the pit of Amanda's stomach. Derek turned to Emily, desperate. Say something. He can't do this. Emily shook her head, her voice trembling. He can. And you know why. Amanda spun toward her. Don't you dare take his side. Emily's voice rose, breaking through the hallway. You lied to me. Both of you. You told me he was losing it, that he needed us to take over. But you were stealing from him. From my father. Her voice echoed down the hall. Heads turned, whispers flared. For the first time, the shame didn't fall on me, it fell on them. Amanda's face flushed red, then pale. Derek slumped against the wall, his shoulders shaking. I closed the folder, the snap of its clasp loud in the silence. This house was never yours to take. And now, it never will be. Not for either of you. But it will mean something. It will help those who served, those who gave. That's more than I can say for what you've done. The hallway buzzed with murmurs. Respect, this time, not pity, aimed in my direction. Amanda tried to speak again, but no sound came. Derek muttered something low, inaudible, but the weight of defeat was written across his face. Emily stayed where she was, tears streaking her cheeks, whispering softly, I'm so sorry, Dad. For the first time, her words felt real. I turned, walked toward the exit, the folder secure under my arm. Behind me, the sound of whispers grew louder, a tide I no longer feared. Because I had delivered the strongest strike. And nothing they could do would undo it. Because I had delivered the strongest strike. And nothing they could do would undo it. The courthouse was quieter than I expected. The air smelled of polish and paper, like a place where lives were decided with ink instead of blood. I sat at the long wooden table, the deed folder in front of me. Its leather cover was worn smooth by weeks of battles, but tonight it felt heavier than ever. Across the room, Derek sat slumped, his suit wrinkled, sweat darkening the collar. Amanda beside him looked brittle, her sharp edges dulled by exhaustion. For once, her eyes didn't glitter with confidence, they flickered with panic. Emily sat apart, her hands clasped, her gaze fixed downward. Judge Callahan shuffled papers, his voice steady as he reviewed the filings. Mr. Harris, you've submitted a trust transferring ownership of the Harris home to a veterans charity. You've also filed eviction orders against your son and daughter-in-law. Amanda rose suddenly, her chair scraping the floor. Your Honor, please. He's not thinking clearly. He's old, confused. We were only trying to help him manage his affairs. I leaned forward, my voice calm but cutting. If I were confused, Amanda, could I stand here with proof of your forgery? Could I show bank statements, cancelled accounts, legal notices? No. You underestimated me. And now the law doesn't. Derek pushed himself to his feet, his voice hoarse. Dad, please. Don't do this. I made mistakes, I know. But we're family. Family forgives. The word struck me harder than I expected. For a moment, I saw the boy he used to be, the son who helped me paint the fence, who carried lumber to the shed, who once looked at me with admiration instead of greed. But then I remembered the forged signature. The whispered words in my own kitchen, he's just waiting to die so we can sell the house. Family forgives. But forgiveness without change is surrender. Amanda's voice cracked as she stepped forward. William, think of Emily. Think of the grandchildren you'll never see if you go through with this. You'll die alone, with no one by your side. I stood slowly, my hand resting on the folder. Better alone with dignity, than surrounded by thieves. The words rang through the courtroom, sharp and final. A murmur rippled through the benches. Emily rose then, her voice trembling. Stop. Please. She turned to Derek, her face pale. You lied to me. You told me Dad couldn't handle things, that he was slipping. You made me believe I had to choose between my husband and my father. Her voice broke. And I chose wrong. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she turned toward me. Dad, I'm sorry. I should have stood up for you. I should have trusted you. For the first time, Amanda faltered, her hand gripping Derek's arm as if she might fall. Derek shook his head, eyes red, but no words came. The judge tapped his gavel lightly. The court recognizes the validity of the trust. The transfer stands. The eviction order is approved. Amanda gasped, covering her mouth. Derek lowered his head into his hands. I closed the folder gently, the sound echoing in the silent courtroom. Emily's sobs filled the space. She crossed the room slowly, stopping just short of me. Please, Dad. Don't shut me out completely. I want to make this right. I don't care about the house, I care about you. Her words cracked something inside me. My throat tightened, my chest heavy. For weeks, I had carried the weight of betrayal. Now, in her trembling voice, I heard something else, regret, real and raw. I placed a hand on the folder, grounding myself. Emily, this house is no longer mine to give. It belongs to something greater now. But my door, my heart, will never be closed to you if you walk toward truth. Her tears fell faster, but she nodded, clutching her hands to her chest as though she had been given back something she thought lost forever. Derek lifted his head, eyes hollow. So that's it? We lose everything? I met his gaze steadily. You lost it the day you treated me like nothing more than a signature on a page. Amanda turned away, her face hardened, but even her shoulders shook. The judge stood, finalizing the ruling. This matter is settled. As people filed out, whispers rose again. But this time, they weren't whispers of pity or shame. They were words of respect. Of vindication. I tucked the folder under my arm. For the first time, it felt light. The war was over. But the echoes of what came next, my resolution, my dignity, would carry further than Amanda and Derek could imagine. The war was over. But the echoes of what came next, my resolution, my dignity, would carry further than Amanda and Derek could imagine. The courthouse steps were crowded that afternoon, the September sun glinting off polished railings as people spilled into the square. I moved slowly, the deed folder tucked beneath my arm. It had been my burden, my weapon, and now, my legacy. Reporters lingered at the bottom of the stairs, their cameras snapping as Amanda pulled Derek by the arm, her face contorted with fury. Emily trailed behind, her cheeks still wet with tears. The crowd parted for them, but no one reached out. No one offered comfort. The silence that followed them was louder than any jeer. But when I stepped forward, the silence shifted. Mr. Harris, someone called, their voice carrying. Is it true? You gave the house to the veterans? I paused, the weight of the folder heavy in my hand. The crowd leaned closer, waiting. Yes, I said, my voice steady. This house wasn't built to be stolen. It was built to mean something. Now, it will. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, but this time, they weren't whispers of pity. They were nods of approval, soft claps that grew louder until the courthouse steps filled with applause. Amanda spun, her voice shrill, cutting against the sound. He's destroying his own family. Don't you see? But the people did see. Mrs. Klein, who had whispered once on her porch, stepped forward boldly. Families don't forge each other's names. Families don't steal. He stood for himself, and for what's right. The applause swelled again, drowning Amanda's protests. Derek lowered his head, shoulders sagging as though the weight of truth had finally crushed him. Emily stood frozen, torn between shame and the glimmer of a path back to me. The veteran's representative, a tall man in uniform, approached the steps. He shook my hand firmly, his eyes bright with gratitude. On behalf of the men and women who served, thank you. This house will stand for something greater than all of us. I nodded, my throat tight. My wife's voice echoed in my mind, clear as the day she first signed the deed, "Do good with what we've built." The applause thundered, echoing down Main Street. Amanda covered her ears, Derek tugged her toward the car, and Emily stayed where she was, watching me with eyes full of sorrow and hope. Later, I returned to the motel. The quiet felt different now, less like exile, more like peace. I set the folder on the desk and opened it one last time. Inside were the signatures, the trust documents, the final ruling. Proof that my house, my sweat, my years, had not been swallowed by betrayal but redirected into meaning. I touched my wife's name, tracing the ink softly. "We did it, Martha," I whispered. "They didn't win." A knock came at the door. I opened it to find Emily standing there, her eyes swollen, hands twisting nervously. "Dad," she said softly. "I don't expect forgiveness. But, can I come in?" For a moment, I hesitated. The wound was still raw. But her voice wasn't Amanda's, wasn't Derek's. It was hers. I stepped aside. She entered quietly, her gaze falling on the folder open on the desk. Tears welled again. "I hated you once, for standing your ground," she admitted. "But now, I see. You weren't just protecting a house. You were protecting yourself. Protecting Mom's memory." Her words broke something in me, but not in pain. In release. I closed the folder gently, my hand resting on it for the final time. "This house is gone, Emily. But you and I, we don't have to be." She nodded, tears falling freely. For the first time, I saw my daughter again, not Amanda's echo, not Derek's accomplice, but the girl my wife and I had raised. The folder sat between us, no longer a weapon, no longer a burden. It had carried us through war, and now it could rest. Weeks later, I stood outside the house as the Veterans Foundation raised their flag on the porch. The community gathered, clapping as the banner unfurled. Amanda and Derek were nowhere to be seen. Their absence was louder than their presence had ever been. I lingered at the edge of the crowd, Emily beside me. She squeezed my hand softly. "They'll never understand what you did," she said. "Maybe not," I replied. "But the people who matter will." As the flag flapped in the wind, I felt the last of the weight lift. The house was no longer mine, no longer theirs, it was something bigger. I left the crowd quietly, walking back down the street with the folder tucked under my arm for the final time. At the corner, I paused, opened it, and slid my wife's signed deed into my jacket pocket. The rest, the legal papers, the trust documents, I left on the bench beneath the maple tree outside the church. A symbol for anyone who needed to see that dignity can be defended, even when family fails you. I walked on, lighter, freer. The war was over. And I had won it, not by keeping the house, but by keeping my name. The deed folder left on the church bench, emptied, no longer needed, symbol of a war fought, dignity kept, and legacy redefined. If you were in my place, would you have done the same? Tell me in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.